Attention, Texans fans, a bombshell move behind the scenes could completely change the course of Houston's defense. League sources suggest a trade that would leave the fan base in shock and put Nick Caserio's management under fire. The name in play? One of the team's cornerstones, recently renewed and beloved by the fans. And if you think this is the only controversy, brace yourself. The most criticized bet of the offseason is already showing concerning signs even before stepping onto the field. Welcome. Show your support for the Texans by reaching 100 likes on today's video. Danielle Hunter's name has returned to the center of discussions in Houston, and not because of an injury or drop in performance, but for something even more controversial, a potential trade. The veteran pass rusher who signed a one-year extension for $35 million was mentioned in a bold proposal to bring an elite wide receiver to the Texans. The speculation, reported by Steve Silverman of Clutch Points, suggests that GM Nick Caserio might consider sacrificing one of his top defenders in exchange for a high-caliber offensive piece to accelerate C.J. Straud's development. For many, this idea borders on irresponsibility. Hunter arrived in 2024 as an immediate impact reinforcement for DeMeco Ryans' defense and delivered, being one of the leadership voices in the locker room and finishing the regular season with 13.5 sacks. His fit in the defensive system was as natural as expected, and even with his injury history in 2020 and 2021, he has shown to be one of the most consistent pass rushers in the league when healthy. The central argument behind the idea of trading Hunter revolves around the desire to equip C.J. Stroud with an elite receiver. It is undeniable that the young quarterback has shown great potential in 2024, and with a more robust offensive roster, he could really take a leap toward the top of the conference. But here's the point. Sacrificing a proven defensive talent for an offensive promise is a risk that could be costly. The timing also raises questions. Hunter was renewed just a few months ago, and parting with such a recently valued player could signal internal disorganization and instability in the management's decisions. Additionally, the team has already invested in the 2025 draft in two receivers, Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, banking on the development of these young talents within the current offensive system. Nick Caserio, known for unpredictable decisions, might be exploring scenarios in the market, but it's hard to believe he is truly willing to part with an elite defender, a key piece of a defense that has been carefully assembled over the past two seasons. And it's not just about on-field production. Hunter is a technical and emotional leader. Another relevant point is the depth of the defensive roster. The Texans' defensive line is still a work in progress. Losing Hunter now could overload younger and still inconsistent names like Will Anderson Jr., weakening a unit that has already struggled to maintain consistency against more physical ground attacks in 2024. It's also important to highlight the context of the AFC. While teams like the Ravens, Bengals, and Chiefs establish themselves as balanced powerhouses on both sides of the ball, the Texans run the risk of regressing on defense while trying to compensate for offensive haste. It's the classic NFL short game. Short blanket, and Caserio knows that. There is indeed room to add talent on offense, but there are less radical and destructive ways to achieve that goal. A targeted contract in free agency, trades for players in the last year of their contracts, or simply betting on the internal growth of names like Tank Dell and Nico Collins. Putting Danielle Hunter on the market at this moment, besides being misinterpreted by the fans, could be seen as a sign of desperation. And worse, if realized, the trade would need to bring in a truly elite receiver to justify such a sacrifice. The problem? The few names that fit this profile, like A.J. Brown, Jamar Chase, or Justin Jefferson, are not realistically on the table. For a team that bets on stability and sustainable growth, trading one of its defensive cornerstones would be contradictory. Danielle Hunter is more than a productive player. He is a symbol of the new physical and aggressive identity that DeMeco Ryans is trying to establish. And if there is one certainty in the NFL, it's that championship teams are built through defense. And while the rumors about Danielle Hunter provoke outrage among the fans, another recent decision by the Texans management is also being heavily questioned. However, in this case, the problem is not a potential departure, but the arrival of a veteran with a concerning history. If the team wants to protect its young quarterback and avoid repeating the mistakes of last season, this signing needed to be surgical. But all indications are that the choice made could end up being the first major regret of the year. Let's talk about it. Laken Tomlinson, the 33-year-old veteran offensive guard, arrived at the Texans with a low-risk contract, $4.25 million for 1 year. But even with modest numbers, the move is already raising red flags among analysts and fans. After a season in which Houston's offensive line allowed 54 sacks, there was a clear expectation for impactful solutions. And Tomlinson, according to many, does not represent that. Richard Lewis, a columnist for House of Houston, was direct. Age is against him, and the history shows that his presence could be a facilitator for defensive pressure. Tomlinson may have had good moments in spring training, but those who closely follow the NFL know that OTAs and minicamps rarely reveal the real scenario. When the pads come on and the pressure mounts, the story is different. It's important to remember that Tomlinson, although he was a Pro Bowler in 2021 with the 49ers, has experienced a downward trajectory in recent years. Unremarkable stints with the Jets and Seahawks have left scars. In 2024, for example, he finished the season with a PFF grade of only 56.3, below the average among starting guards in the league. This was on an offensive line for the Seahawks that also faced harsh criticism. The context in Houston is even more delicate. C.J. Stroud is the franchise's jewel, and protecting him must be an absolute priority. The team has already dealt with various OL combinations in 2024 due to injuries and poor performances. The expectation was that 2025 would bring consistency and protection, and that's where the bet on Tomlinson seems disconnected from the urgency of the problem. Another critical point, he arrives to be the starter, not as a rotational option or experienced backup. Caserio and D'Amico's plan is to place him as the main left guard from training camp. The lack of depth at the position may have forced the decision, but that only further exposes the fragility of the Texans' offensive line. Moreover, it's worth noting that Tomlinson is not an athlete with a dominant physical profile. His technique is solid but limited. Against aggressive defensive fronts, like those of the Jaguars and Colts, direct rivals in the division, he tends to struggle with bull rushes and stunts. And for a team that wants to contend for the playoffs, this type of disadvantage in the trenches is unacceptable. Of course, there's a chance he could deliver a minimally stable season. But even in the best-case scenario, Tomlinson is not the type of reinforcement that changes the level of a unit. He is, at best, a stopgap solution, and relying on stopgap solutions in such a competitive division like the AFC South is a bet that borders on recklessness. The Texans' offseason had some good moments: the renewal with Hunter, the bet on young receivers in the draft, and targeted defensive moves. But the offensive line continues to be a point of tension. And with Stroud entering a key moment in his career, every evaluation error weighs double. It wouldn't be surprising if, in a few weeks of preseason, the coaching staff starts looking for internal alternatives or even names in the market. And if that happens, the question will be inevitable: why spend over $4 million on a player who was never the solution? The overall scenario in Houston is, at the same time, promising and concerning. On one side, a young team with emerging talent and a quarterback who inspires hope. On the other, decisions that challenge sports logic. Contemplating trading Danielle Hunter and betting on Laken Tomlinson as a starter. The Texans of 2025 seem willing to take risks, but how far is it worth it? Now, I want to know from you, Texans fan. Would you accept trading Hunter for an elite wide receiver? Or do you think the defense needs to be the absolute priority? If you like the content, leave your like, comment your opinion down below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any updates on the Texans this season. Until the next video.